Hello and welcome to the LCS Countdown, where for the next 30 minutes we'll be talking Honda MVPs, most improved players, and duking it out in some dueling drafts until the timer reaches 0 and we load onto the Rift. Today I'm joined by Emily, Primal, and Hi, so let's get right into it. While yesterday's game certainly gave us pause, Emily, I want your thoughts on our first match where number 1 C9 fell to an ever-rising CLG.
Yeah, so I really want to see what would have happened if we'd had this CLG roster from the beginning, right? Because they look so much better now that they're more well coordinated, they have more practice together. Pobelter's back in the lineup, Brox has been here for a little while. Finn is still kind of a standout for this team. I actually think they could have made a little bit more from his early laning. But this team is, suddenly working together. We see a lot of the building blocks that we saw previously with their early game now being supported by better mid-game play. I really loved the fact that they didn't contest that one Drake and then instead they had the wave set top, dropped Herald, got so much more from it. I want to see more cross-map trades. And plays like that from other teams as well. You don't always have to contest Drake. But yeah, I really enjoyed watching CLG yesterday.
I enjoyed it too, Emily, and I'll go even further and say, of course I did, right? I'll go even further and say, if this CLG lineup was in place at the start of the split, this CLG lineup would have made playoffs. I mean, we're in 2021 now, and we're talking about Wild Turtle and Smoothie. So the 2v2 killing, Sven, and that blows my mind, right? That's not a matchup that you expect them to win. And I think what we're seeing here is CLG, in addition to having really good level ones and having an idea of what they want to do in lanes, they have the ability to now transition their lead from the early game into clean objective plays. Their side laning is much better with Pobelter on side lanes when he's playing Lucian, not getting caught out. And overall, this team just looks a lot more crisp, and this is what we expected from a veteran lineup.
I mean, sporting a positive record now with this intended starting lineup has got to feel good, and they're going to look to continue to put a couple more wins on the board before we close out the spring split. That was the first of our upsets yesterday, and of course the biggest one. But Primal, we immediately followed that game with another, EG over TSM. Your assessment of that match?
So this was an upset, but I think much less so. If we think back to EG at the start of the split, they were a really explosive, dynamic team. You have plays from Impact constantly carrying regardless of a champion he's on. And we saw a little bit of a resurgence of that. We saw Sven scale it back a little, focus on supporting Impact to get him hilariously fed on Aatrox. And we saw Jizuke doing what he's best at, which is playing these 1v1 split push type champs and going for 1-3-1. And for TSM, we sort of saw the same story we've seen all split. They're having a lot of trouble being proactive. They're still not a very good early game team, and they rely on scaling. So I expect this to get exploited more as the split goes on.
I think for TSM yesterday, obviously, I don't think the EG beating TSM is that much of an upset. There is a bit of a stylistic difference there. Not only that, they kind of had a poor draft. If you take a look at the lanes and what they're able to do, they didn't really have strong setup anywhere. So they fell behind, and like Mark said before, losing isn't a play style, right? If you're behind on scaling champions, you don't have strong playmaking ability at the time, you don't really have much opportunity to be making these plays, right? If you're just getting beat up in every single lane, your jungler is on the head, it's very hard for you to make plays, and you kind of have to hope the other team makes a bad play or you do a trade. So I'm not too concerned about TSM as far as the proactivity earlier or anything like that. I think they should be okay, assuming that they have stronger champions or a better draft.
Well, the results of those two games did wonders in terms of shaking up our standings a bit. And if we pull those up, we will see that Cloud9 does remain in first by only 1 win. But we are back to that good old four-way tie for second between 100 Thieves, Dignitas, Team Liquid, and TSM, with Evil Geniuses just 1 win behind them in 6th. Now, as we look ahead towards our postseason, one thing has become clear. If you've got 10 wins to your name, we'll see you at the midseason showdown. Now, beyond that, however, little is certain. So, including, how these teams will ultimately be seeded when we head into that tournament. And that's where I want to stop down, talk about the 5 teams at the top of the table competing for the 4 spots that will put you into that double elim portion of the bracket. Hi?
Right. So, first and foremost, the teams don't care too much whatever rank they get between 1 to 4, they'll be happy playing any other team. All the teams are pretty even in terms of strength. What they don't want is to be 5th or 6th. That's the most important thing that they're looking at, because when you're 5th or 6th at the end of the season, you're in the lower bracket, and if you lose, you're automatically out. Whereas if you're the top side, you can lose 1 game and be sent to a loser's bracket. So for TSM specifically, I took a look at their strength of schedule, and I want to say they have the easiest strength of schedule coming up. They have 2 more games left and I believe they'll be able to go 2-0 here. They have IMT and Golden Guardians. They haven't been looking that strong, so I'm pretty confident TSM will be in the top 4 at the end of the season and that they'll be able to avoid starting the lower bracket.
Looking for 2 more wins here to close out the split. Primal, who are you looking at?
I'm looking at Dignitas, and it's because of what Hai said. He's completely right that 1 through 4, not as big of a deal, but you don't want to be 5th or 6th. And Dignitas, they could end up 5th or 6th, right? Today they have a difficult matchup against C9. They're 0-2 versus TL. They haven't beaten C9 either yet. So I think for Dignitas in particular, it's critical for them to get 3rd or 4th so they can avoid one of these top teams and hopefully have a little bit more time to gel and then maybe contest them in a best of 5.
Now, of course, Emily, we do also have to continue the conversation down to those 5th and 6th spots. Most importantly, number 6, because EG Immortals, the 2 teams that are still on that bubble, either being in or out of playoffs.
Yeah, so basically, IMT are in the roughest spot here because they not only have to win out, but then they also have to rely on EG to lose out, which is, mathematically unlikely. The thing that I think is really interesting about both of these teams is that I think they're quite similar in that some of their inconsistencies come from, these are 2 teams that they tend to draft really specifically for specific game plans. I have previously both praised and criticized a lot of what Immortals try to do because sometimes I think they look insanely good with really great drafts and they seem to have a really good understanding of what they want to do going into the game. And then other times it just, something falls apart, and if something doesn't go their way early, they tend to get a little lost in the mid game. It's interesting to me that both of the teams that are right on the cusp of making it, and I do think EG will end up making it, I think they are the stronger team, are these teams that have these like really specific inconsistencies, but an interesting idea of how they want to play the game when they do load in.
Yeah, distinct possibility that by the end of today, we will know which 6 teams are in our postseason with only seeding left to be decided. Now, we've already talked quite a bit this spring about who our Honda MVP will be, but as our weekend rolls along, it's become even clearer that Blabber isn't the only candidate with a real shot of taking the title. So I do want to hear from each of you. Who do you think we should be considering when it comes to casting our votes for the mid-season awards? And before we get to the players themselves, I want to understand a little bit about what each of you is looking for when we say that phrase MVP. Primal, let's start with you.
Yeah, so let's look at the term. It's most valuable player, right? And for me, value means you're creating advantages for your team, and ideally you're converting them into wins. Now, when we have such a close top of the standings, I don't necessarily think that the MVP has to come from the winning team, but I think you need to be the best in your role, and you need to be someone who is good at all parts of the game, creates advantages for your team actively, and then is able to cement them into wins.
Emily, what are you looking at?
So value is also this really nebulous thing, right? Which is why I've been criticized previously for some of my picks as a journalist. But I think I'm always looking at the top teams. I am looking at individual performance, but also what that person is doing in terms of relative to the team's success. A lot of times I feel like the split between how people decide MVPs is like, look at this player, he's trying his like absolute hardest, and somehow the team isn't able to necessarily convert all of that into wins. And so I try to take that into consideration too, in terms of what value a player is bringing to the team, to their play style, and how they're translating that into success.
Right. For me, when I'm thinking about MVPs, it's a bit difficult because 1, I'm not in the game, and then 2, I can't hear the comms of the teams. Had I had those 2 things, it might change how I feel about MVP, but all I can do is take a look at what I have. So I can take a look at the stats, the performance of the teams, and who's doing well. This split has been a pretty jungle/support focused meta, and I have to talk about Blabber here. People have been kind of ragging on him recently because he hasn't been dominating as hard. But let's be real, the first 4 weeks, he's been destroying every single team. They're still the first place team. You take a look at any single of his stats, he's almost first in like 99. Actually, he's probably first in every single stat that matters. So people can rag on him saying he hasn't had the best game, maybe yesterday or even the week before. But this split, it's a MVP award for the entire season. It's 6 weeks long. The first 4 weeks, he absolutely demolished everyone. The past 2 weeks, maybe not as much, but it's like comparing someone that like did 10 out of 10 to 9 out of 10. Like, yeah, he might be 9 out of 10 this week, but like, what about the first 4 weeks where he's 10 out of 10? So I'm on the Blabber hype train for MVP. He's a very hard sell for me.
Here's the thing, Hai. So I agree with you that Blabber is by far the best in his role, but he hasn't destroyed every team, right? TL has had their number in both of the times that they met. So I'm actually looking at Alfari, right? The standings have gotten super close. I think we can all agree that Alfari has been the best top laner all split. Now, granted, that hasn't necessarily resulted in the standings that we would expect for TL because they've dropped some games to teams that frankly we wouldn't expect them to drop games to. But if we look at him statistically, he's leading at every category that matters as well. So I think this weekend is going to be crucial for determining whether it's Blabber or Alfari, and I could see a chance that it's Alfari.
Yeah, it's really interesting to compare both of those players too, because I think they both have cases where like Alfari is doing insanely well topside, right? And then they don't necessarily transfer that priority. Last week, we saw a game where Blabber had still a phenomenal early game and they weren't able to translate that into a victory too. So we have to consider how much those, relate to the success of the team, because sometimes it's also a team reason why they might not win. I do want to move to, I think his name should be mentioned, despite the fact that he's not necessarily a frontrunner for me as MVP, but Power of Evil has been such a core and crucial part of TSM. I know like a lot of people, when they look at TSM's play style, Primal already kind of criticized it earlier, where because he has this very standard mid lane is this control point that kind of radiates outward. That's what he's been known for his entire career, is just this incredibly strong laning mid. I also want to highlight from this tweet, which was kind of from their turnaround in the early weeks where they were looking really, really shaky after lock-in, and they had this really close game against Golden Guardians where PoE actually ended up coming out and saying that he did make that Baron call. I do think that as this team has come together, has gelled in comms, I want to say that PoE, from things that we've seen from their own content and from stuff that he said, he's obviously a very big voice on the team. He's been a very strong voice on previous teams he's been on. So I did want to give him a shout out for being this kind of rock for TSM around which they could stabilize.
I totally agree on him being a rock, and he's like a bomb actually. Like he's like the late game win condition. He feels inevitable. You know that if you get to the late game, he's gonna carry on control mages. So still critical of TSM's early game, but I think PoE is a huge reason that they've managed to win the games that they have.
I got a couple more players I want to talk about, and Primal, I think we would be remiss to not talk about Dignitas as a roster and a lineup. They've been the surprise of the split by all means, and so first and foremost, let's talk about Afro down there in the bot lane.
Yeah, so look, going into the split, I don't think anyone was talking about Afro when they talked about best supports in the league. We were talking about Core JJ and Vulcan and Huhi, but I think Afro has made a case for himself as being a top 2 support in the league in terms of just performance this split, along with Vulcan. And I think he's been the playmaker and facilitator for this team, both in-game, getting 2v2 kills, really making sure that Neo can carry late game, and making plays on Alistar, on Thresh to facilitate plays. But the issue with Dignitas is that they've really fumbled versus some of the top teams, right? They're 0-2 versus 100 Thieves, they're 0-2 versus TL, and the team that they did beat is TSM, so that looks good. But overall, I think they're still dark horses here.
For Dignitas, when we're talking about them, in the beginning of the split, I don't think very many people had them being tied for second at the current standings that we're at. And a large reason of why they've been doing so well is because of their macro play and team decisions and how to take fights. So earlier I said it's hard to tell who deserves what because we don't know who's making the shot calls on the team and we don't know who's like leading the team in the game. So I gotta say it's gotta be between Dardak and Afro, between who's shot calling, because they themselves said that they are the veterans of the team, that the other 3 players usually listen to them when calls are had. So I think for me, I gotta give Dardak a shout out. He has been a player that has, been heavily criticized in the past, but this split, he's shown that he's one of the best junglers NA's had for quite a while, due to the fact that he's played so many different champions and he's carried a lot of the different champions. Not only that, he's also one of the reasons why making these good plays when it comes to dragons and barons. I gotta assume since he's a jungler, he's probably the one making the call of whether they're fighting it, whether they're doing it, etc. But at the end of the day, I can't really know. So I do want to give a shout out to Dardak and Afro. Whichever one is the shot caller for them, they've been playing well and they should keep it up.
And just to follow up on that, when we initially heard about Dignitas and how they were going to have like a very even coaching staff and then have really, really be heavily relying on Dardoch and Afromu to be basically essentially like player coaches almost and have a really, really strong voice in what Dignitas were doing. I think a lot of us, including myself, like I'll call myself out here too, like I was very, very skeptical as to whether this would work. It seems to have worked really, really well. So that's another like nebulous intangible of value that these two players are bringing to this Dignitas lineup.
Well,
And Emily, I think it's great that you called yourself out, but let's be honest, everyone was skeptical. Unless you're like these 5 players, their moms and the coach.
Like, you all were skeptical, but I was right. Like, no, I was in there too. I was like, I was skeptical too. Work.
Yeah.
We all played party to that one. Well, each and every single one of these players is going to have 2 games left to make their case for Honda MVP. So let's look ahead at today's schedule and see what those Honda MVP hopefuls have ahead of them. We're coming out of the gate with second place TSM taking on Immortals, followed by Dignitas and Cloud9 facing off for their place at the top of the table. Later on, Evil Geniuses will be going up against Team Liquid with even more action on the Rift throughout the day. Now, speaking of action, our very own Azael has been chomping at the bit for months now, waiting ravenously to finally challenge one of our analysts to duel him in the art of drafts. And as you can see by her face, Emily was brave enough to take him to task.
Yeah,
Hello,
sure.
everyone. Azael here with Emily Wren and the head of the Dignitas versus Cloud9 game today. We're going to do a little bit of dueling drafts to give you all some insight into some of the thought processes that go into the picks and bans. I'll be taking Cloud9, she'll be taking Dignitas, and has selected blue side. Kick us off.
All right, so I'm first picking Tristana. She's an incredibly flexible pick. I can send her to multiple lanes. She has insane pushing power. Recently, I've seen so many LPL games that were seemingly decided by late game Tristana diff in team fights. And since people have been fighting a lot more and Dignitas typically like to fight into late, I really like this Tristana pick. And Azael's not going to know where it's going.
True. I'm also a little bit sad I banned Syndra. Maybe hoping that I could grab the Tristana myself, but I'm not too sad because Kaisa Rel is open. This bot lane duo is a beast. It gives you the ability to play a lot of different playstyles, which is one of the important things for me in the early picks here. To be able to set up for team fights, to be able to play front to back, to be able to go alongside with a lot of dive. I think it's really flexible. I think it's really powerful.
And I'm going to respond by blocking in Hecarim, which I just think is one of, if not the strongest jungle option on 11.5. And then additionally, I'm going to lock in the Alistar, which has been known as kind of a counter pick to Rel, I guess. But more than that, I just want Afro on a playmaker that he's really comfortable on. And we've seen Afro carry entire team fights on this Alistar pick. It allows him to facilitate a lot of stuff that Dignitas like to do. And if he's allowed to roam early, he can also make plays with it in other lanes as well.
Seeing the Hecarim locked in, I know I want to keep this down early. I want to be able to be proactive. I want to be able to find engages, and I'm just generally a fan of compositions with 2 forms of engage. I grabbed the Gragas, knowing this could be flex top, play a tank weak side. You could play AP top side. You could also put it in the jungle potentially, set up for something like a Gragas Yasuo. So again, keeping my options open. Going into the bans, I grabbed GP as well as Callista. I want to take out the GP to protect that Gragas if we are going to be playing tank Gragas up on the top side. Deny that away. Also, I think that it could pair well with the Alistar, knowing that's going in, being able to ult bot lane for the Hecarim, for the Alistar, look to pick on my bot lane. And also, at this point, I'm thinking Tristana is going mid, so I'm going to be banning out that Callista, which would be a strong pairing with the Alistar.
Which stinks because I would have picked Kalista, but I respond with Lilia just because that's another really strong jungle pick that I don't want Blabber to have, despite the fact that I do know that he is more than willing to flex this Gragas into the jungle. And then additionally, Orianna, she's a really safe, mid-blind pick if they wanted to do that. I know Perks can play her really well, so I just want her off the table given how many compositions she can fit into.
At this point, I grab Rek'Sai. I'm thinking, all right, I want a champion, a little bit of AD, the ability to actually put Hecarim behind early to attack Hecarim. And this is also going to set me up for a 5th pick mid, which should allow me to get mid jungle prio and attack that Hecarim even more.
So I don't know what he's going to pick mid, but here's where the draft gets really Dignitas, so to speak. I lock in Zoe for Saligo because I think this is actually one of Saligo's better champions. I think he's performed super, super well on it. I also think that Zoe is a lot more flexible than people give her credit for, especially when I see her played in other regions as setup, not only with her pick potential, but her CC. And then additionally, I'm surprised I'm flexing the Triss top. This is something that maybe if you're not
This I did
watching,
not see coming.
yeah, if you're not watching other regions, you know, it's a risky pick, but I actually really like what Dignitas have been doing around their solo laners. I think Fake God is performing phenomenally well, and this is something that he can kind of take over a game on. I'm going to have at least the push on the top side. And you know, this is a draft that even if Dignitas mess up in their mid-game macro, which they themselves have admitted they do very frequently, they believe in their hands. They believe in the power of their team fight, and this is a draft where Samira can just go off. You know, we go in, we team fight, we just do a ton of damage, and hopefully, even if C9 have a good early game, we can come back.
Well, for my 5th pick, I grabbed LeBlanc. I think it's a good matchup in a Zoe. I need some AP in my composition. I also think it's an incredibly strong pairing with Rek'Sai, not only to attack the Zoe, but to get Prio mid, go into the Hecarim's jungle, look to attack him, and potentially make moves towards the top side to punish Tristana, who, as you said, is going to be pushing. You know, when I'm looking at this composition, Gragas is mostly going to be playing weak side, stack up the armor. Yes, Zoe does do magic damage, but it's more the poke that you're worried about there. So stacking armor, stacking health, I think is going to be pretty powerful. And Rel alongside Gragas is a lot of explosive engage. You can have LeBlanc playing with the team or looking to side lane, trying to get picks with the Rek'Sai, and I'm pretty happy about my team fight alongside Kai'Sa. So I guess that'll do it for the dueling drafts. Thank you, Emily, for drafting with me.
That was
Let us
fun.
know who you guys think won the draft with hashtag LCS on Twitter. Back to you, Dash.
Okay, Emily, you know, I said I was skeptical with you about Dignitas. Now I'm skeptical against you about this whole Triss top thing. I need an explanation.
I mean, Triss top is actually a thing. I'm not trolling, but I think the big thing that really messed me up that what I would have wanted is like a Kalista or a Kai'Sa bot, which didn't end up happening. What I should have done, the safer option would be just to lock in something else for Fake God, rotate the Triss bot, which is, if I'm criticizing myself, that is where I'm saying, you know what, Emily, you sprinted it. But this is actually like such a fun exercise. I've never done a time draft before, honestly. And so I have like such a newfound respect for coaches that obviously they're going to get a lot more prep time than I did, but they also have players telling them, I want to play this, I don't want to play this. Even though we practice this, I'm not super comfortable on it. I just decided it right now as I'm in my chair. So shout out to all you coaches out there. This was so difficult and also so much fun. So thank you, Zale, for letting me do it.
Yeah, not an enviable position to be the person who has to tell Hai he's not allowed to play Teemo on stage today. Either way, that was a ton of fun to watch. Who knows? She might be right. We'll find out soon enough if that's the draft that Dignitas is going to take to the stage. But we are taking a breather ourselves. When we return, we'll be talking most improved players of spring. See you here. LCS Countdown. We had plenty of powerhouse names in our Honda MVP discussion, but another area worth spotlighting this spring in particular, I believe, is our most improved players. Starting with the odd man out in this conversation, Evil Geniuses, definitely.
Yeah, you know, definitely was a player with a lot of question marks around him. You know, he was sort of the black sheep on a team of players that, you know, has a pedigree. But I think that question mark has gone away, and it's just a period, full stop. This guy is good. And we've seen him carry consistently for EG. He's arguably been their most consistent player, game after game, carrying late game and team fights on picks like Kai'Sa. So I think definitely has been really, really improved, and I think everyone should update their perception of him now.
And while definitely being the odd man out on Evil Geniuses, Emily, we can't ignore the trio of players over there on Dignitas behind the two veterans that we were talking about in our Honda MVP discussion. Let's start from the top lane and move our way down to the bottom. So, Fake God, what are you thinking?
So obviously, I have a lot of confidence in Fake God if you saw my draft. But jokes aside, I think Fake God has, you know, improved tremendously. This is a player that I saw at Scouting Grounds, and he kind of came out of nowhere to perform really, really well at that event where people are like, okay, who is this kid? Where has he been? What has he been doing? His first performance in LCS, I know a lot of times when players come in, especially in more of an emergency or like a substitute position, and they have one bad game or a few bad games, people tend to look at it and crystallize that in their mind as like the extent of what this player is capable of. I think we're definitely seeing Fake God improve from game to game, not just from then to now. And I think I'm really, really impressed with how he's played with this team. And I think the team facilitates him really well.
Speaking of being impressed about play, I've been more impressed with Soligo recently. If I'm going to be honest, you bring it back a year or two ago, I didn't think he was that good. I was pretty sure I could beat him 1v1 in lane. He's kind of no big deal. But nowadays, I think he would destroy me in lane. So
Whoa.
I'll give him that as a compliment. He's gotten a lot better since the past few years. He's no longer just in the 0-1 trick. He's been playing Yone and a bunch of different champions that he has shown skill on. So I'm really impressed with his ability to get better over time. And it's one of those things that people are always harping on NA about, right? Give players some time to develop. It takes some people more time than others, but Soligo is doing really well, and I'm looking forward to seeing him play more.
Hi, I think you saying Soligo would destroy you is the single nicest thing I've heard you say about any mid laner on or off broadcast. So congrats to Soligo. But I want to talk about Neo. I'm really, really impressed with Neo. This is a guy who was asked up before and he wasn't particularly good. Let's be honest. He was like, screw that. I'm going to change my name to Neo. I'm going to unplug from the Matrix, train with Morpheus. Now this guy's doing Kung Fu on the Rift. He's had the highest KDA of all players in his position and has been a huge carry for Dignitas later in the game. So this is perhaps the most improved player. And he's also one of the elite players in his position right now.
He's been an absolutely stellar player to watch in his growth this year and a big part of Dignitas' success. Again, the surprise of the split exciting so many of us. But if we're talking about improvements this spring, a name that comes to mind is TSM, a roster that stumbled during lock-in before falling into step as the season kind of progressed. That being said, they are coming off of a very tough loss yesterday. So, I'm wondering, what can TSM do, to bring home a win today?
Honestly, I'm not too concerned about TSM today. They're playing versus IMT, and IMT went 0-2 yesterday, even though they only had one game, quote unquote. So, if anything, I'm more worried about IMT. TSM, they just have to change their drafting a little bit. I think Bjergsen tweeted out basically saying, my bad. You take a look at the draft, they have 3 losing lanes with a weaker jungler. It's really hard to play the game against a team like EG where they're super active early and you don't have any playmaking ability. So moving forward to today, I think Bjergsen's learning how to be a better coach, doing better draft, and they shouldn't hard run it this time around in draft again. They should be fine.
Yeah, I think High's right. They should be fine. IMT, on the other hand, a lot needs to go right? Like, they need a time machine to win. Revenge was solo killing Alphari. Xerxes was carrying on Hecarim. They were drafting Hecarim Rel. Really simple front-to-back comps, because although I like Raze playing these picks like Tristana and playing super aggressively, Vayne where it makes sense, I think what we saw in last game is they had a comp that was really, really hard to execute. He had Xerxes on Udyr, not providing the clear initiation that this team seems to thrive on. He had Raze on Vayne when there's not really anything for Vayne to reliably shred, and I think there's a lot of better AD picks here. So I think what this team needs to do is go back to basics, simple front-to-back team fighting comps, and look to exploit TSM's faltering early game.
Emily, we already talked about Immortals' path to the postseason and the fact that they have to go 2-0. So high stakes when it comes to this matchup. If they lose here, then the rest of the scenarios where EG loses out are irrelevant. But how are you assessing the matchup here between the two squads?
I mean, I kind of agree with Hai that I think TSM are going to be fine. Like, I think from what I've seen from this team, there are very few teams that have been able to exploit any passivity they have early. And furthermore, even though we didn't see it in the last game, something I like to bring up about TSM is the fact that some of their, like, counter control is really good. Basically, like, if another team sets up for an objective and then they respond to it, which may seem like a backhanded compliment, but it's not. Like, we talked about this during their Baron takes as well, which are really interesting. So I think even if TSM fall behind, I'm not sure if IMT have the mid game to be able to punish the way that TSM seem to respond around their opponent setting up for objectives.
Well, with just a couple minutes before we hop into Champions League for that first game, I want to take a look at your predictions for the day. I have a sense of where all of you are going in this very first matchup, but let's see, because yesterday definitely didn't go to chalk either. Oh, my goodness. Across the board.
Is this another day where Dash just gets super mad and then takes all of the counter picks?
It didn't work out for me well very last time. Last time you guys all predicted the same. I said I'm taking the opposite. I ended 2-3 on the day. Let me think about this for a moment. That would mean Immortals over TSM, Dig over Cloud9, FlyQuest over 100, EG over TL and Golden Guardians over CLG. I don't see that fifth one being possible. I don't really see Immortals beating TSM. I could see the other three, you know, as possibilities, however unlikely. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not an analyst for a reason. And now it's time for us to hand it over to Freak and Azale to get us into that first game of the day.